Hello, everybody, and welcome to another James Beard Foundation Industry Support webinar, Your Voice Matters, Congress, Constituents, and the Restaurants Act. I'm Ashley Koziak, and I'm an Impact Program Manager here at the James Beard Foundation. And as everyone kind of filters in from the waiting room into the main webinar room, I'm going to go over some technical points of this webinar. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list, so for those of you who have joined us before, this is all going to be very familiar, but I'm going to go over it again for any new folks who are joining us. So how the webinar works. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available in about 24 hours on our James Beard Foundation site. So if you have to pop off at any point during the webinar to take care of something, or if you just want to review it or share a link with anyone you know, you'll be able to do that, no problem. Like I said, it just takes about 24 hours. So by tomorrow afternoon, Friday afternoon, it should be on our James Beard Foundation Industry Support webinar site, where you can find all of our past webinar recordings, and you can find links to register for next week webinars as well. And we try to keep those as current as we can. As always, we'll save questions for the end of each section or end of each webinar, but you can submit questions at any point in time. And to do that, if you look at the right side of your screen, you're going to see like a little message icon with a question mark in it. So just click that and you can submit a question at any point in time throughout the webinar. But like I said, we are going to take those questions at the end. And finally, if you are having technical difficulties, my colleague Debbie is on this webinar with me. We will do our best to help troubleshoot. We are unfortunately not GoToWebinar tech support, so we will do the best that we can. Oftentimes, the best policy is to log off and then log back on. That often does the trick, but like I said, send us a message and we will do our best to help. So we have a really wonderful panel here with us today, and I'm going to read their bios before handing it over to Tiffany Derry, who's going to be moderating this program for us. So Tiffany Derry is a Beaumont, Texas native, and she began her culinary career at the tender age of 15 at a world-renowned establishment known for breakfast. In 2013, Derry founded Tiffany Derry Concepts, Inc., a company established to support Derry's business and culinary ventures, which include television shows and brand partnerships. She started Roots Chicken Shack in Plano and Austin, serving up duck fat fried chicken, and has Roots Southern Table in Farmers Branch opening in 2021. In addition to her restaurants, you may recognize Chef Derry from Top Chef, Hungry Investors, Bar Rescue, Top Chef Junior, and Chopped Junior, just to name a few. Chef Derry speaks regularly on promoting healthy food policies at home and abroad. We're also happy to be joined by Rob Murray. Rob Murray is the top policy and political advisor for Senator Roger Wicker. He's the strategist to the chairman of the Senate of Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and Senator Wicker is the second ranking Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee and senior member of the Environment and Public Works Committee and Rules Committee. Rob is in his 9th year of work on Capitol Hill and manages a broad legislative portfolio for the senior senator from Mississippi that includes finance and economics, transportation, healthcare, agriculture, and the environment. We're also happy to be joined by Patti Ross. Ms. Patricia Ross joined the office of the Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House of Representatives in 2011. As Senior Policy Advisor, Ms. Ross is the Chief Advisor on all developments, legislative activity, and strategy for veterans and military families, agriculture and nutrition, education, and labor policy in both Speaker Pelosi's leadership and congressional offices. She has advanced major events, including multiple State of the Union addresses, 2013 and 2017 inauguration ceremonies, joint addresses to the Congress by heads of state, honorary ceremonies for high-level officials, and university commencements. So thank you everybody for joining us. I'll be back at the end of the sessions for the Q&A. And for now, I'm going to hand it over to Chef Tiffany Derry. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you, Ashley. Welcome, everybody. First off, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this very important call. And more importantly, we have Robert and Miss Patti, who is incredible. But I just kind of wanted to give you a brief description of sort of my first day going to Capitol Hill. Like many of you, it was something very different for me. I had never really imagined that this is something that I would be doing. I didn't quite understand sort of the how politics and food went together. You know, I stayed in the kitchen, I cooked great food, I wanted a great restaurant. Like, that's what I did. And so I was put forth with an opportunity to go and talk about food. And at this point, we were specifically talking about the Farm Bill, and FBA had brought us down, a lot of chefs, and we went to this sort of room where there is Jose Andres and there is Andrew Zimmerman, and there's all of these great speakers, and they're talking about when we go to Hill and we stump the yard, and you know, we're going to go in and we're going to have these great ideas, and chefs are perfect for this. And I'm just sitting there like, okay. And they gave us a lot of great information to kind of get us ready for what we're about to encounter. We did some role plays on, you know, what to do, but I'm still very nervous at this time. And they're going in with groups. So it's groups of 3 that are going to go to different offices. Then I found out that we're going to 20 different meetings. That's 20 different rooms meeting with 20 different people. So again, very nervous. And on top of that, I find out that Chef Jose Andres is in my team of the 3 chefs. I'm like, I'm never gonna get a word in. I'm nervous now. You know, this girl from Beaumont, Texas, and all of that. But the day came, and we're getting ready to head on up there, and they tell me that Chef Andres has something else to do and won't be making it. And the other chef who's supposed to be with us, flight got delayed. And I'm by myself with, of course, the other folks who are arriving. I am like, this is not a good day. I'm nervous. They nervous because they really hadn't heard me talk, because I'm sitting there just absorbing it all. And this was my first day. We get to the meeting, and there's this lady. She's actually from Houston, which is like 45 minutes from Beaumont. And somehow we started talking, and it was just a conversation. And I realized in that moment I had put too much pressure on myself about things that I didn't know, instead of just talking about the things that I do know and the reason that I was there. And I had so much information, and I really felt like I was prepared to discuss those things. I stuck to what I know. I stayed in my lane. And then I just realized that through all of these conversations, the staffers were the ones you need to be talking to anyway. I mean, they were open, and I really enjoyed the conversation. And eventually, over the years, some of those relationships, they've come into the restaurant. When the hurricane came, I called up some of those people. We talked about anything. You know, if I saw in the mirror that there was sports, and I might have started talking about sports. My son is in college, blah, 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 you know. And so some of those, just finding a way to connect, sort of just kind of smoothed it right on in. So I know that many of you maybe have or haven't gone, but I know the feeling, and it gets better. That's all I really want to say. So thanks for the time. Now to the more important people, Patti and Robert, we've heard their bios, but can you please tell us what you really do? And basically, life, I think the staffer, really.
Sure. You can hear me, I think. So hi, it's Patti. And I think this is one of the hardest questions for me to answer, working for the speaker. Every day is a myriad of things. I don't think there's really something set in stone in the last 5 to 6 months, and I think Rob might agree. But I have been working from home for the last 5 to 6 months, every day, around the clock. And I think every congressional staffer is the first to say that they have so much to do. But I would say the workload's dramatically increased for obvious reasons. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I say every day, when we're in session and voting, it varies, and my boss is constantly in DC, so I'm busy around the clock. Everything on my end is monitoring the news, working through issues, whether it's the food piece or veterans accessing VA or not being able to how does that translate into some of the relief packages, and then the actual negotiation. So I think Rob is, you know, his boss is a senior member of the Senate, and they're in the front lines of any negotiation or discussion on a package. But the actual what's happening in congressional districts and states and in communities, just because of the magnitude of what's happening, is a lot different, and kind of getting a grip around. I think the first 2 months were really rough. but now getting a grip around what do hospitals need and how does that relate to anything that I work on. It's added a tango twist to kind of the day in, day out. So I don't really have a typical day. I've worked every weekend since March. And so not to make it dramatic, but that's what we're here for. And that's why we do the work that we do. And I've seen a whole new set on the food system and in the last few months, and regardless of who's in the administration, there is actually a lot of things in common to work through and work on, and we do, despite what you might read about. So Rob might have a different take, but that's just for me. I don't have a typical day anymore, and I have two phones with me, whether I'm walking my dog or doing yard work, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think Patti definitely hit the nail on the head there. Even when we got our Senate schedule for this Congress, that is, we have not gone by that by any means. The last 6 or 7 months have been extremely chaotic, and it's been really difficult to manage not only our boss but also constituents' expectations on what package might come together as far as COVID. But you've got to also think we have these other authorizations that also take place, whether it's word or transportation bills, spending bills that we're also working on. So it has been very chaotic, but that's obviously why we're here. My boss's schedule, I mean, we usually work on a Monday through Friday. Senator Wicker usually flies in Monday afternoon for our comeback vote. We usually start with a nominee, which will be a 5:30 Monday vote. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays consists of committee hearings, constituent meetings, constituent calls. And those are usually in the morning. We'll have hearings in the morning, and then usually in the afternoons. Pre-COVID, Senator Wicker would have about 8 to 10 meetings in the afternoons, and that would carry us throughout the day. Now he takes a lot of calls throughout the day, and they're sporadic all over the time. And you've seen now too with a lot of committee hearings, you have some members that will go in person, some members will take them in their offices. And then usually what we try to do on Thursday afternoons is send Senator Wicker back to Mississippi. Those are usually our fun days, Thursday afternoons. And then Friday we can usually kind of catch back up. But I mean, as Patti said, it's been a little chaotic these last few months. And then you also got to throw in its election year. So when you're dealing with policy and politics, it's a disaster. But we're working through it. I think we've had some really good bipartisan policies come through. I think there's been some really great negotiations that have gone through. And I think we're going to get another shot at this. Don't look at the last month of negotiations. Phase 4 is now it's dead. I think we're getting another shot at this.
Absolutely agree.
That just seems like a whole lot going on. And we thought running restaurants were crazy.
It's an area of commonality.
That's right. That's right. Let's talk about a little legislation. Congress has been working on multiple COVID packages really since March, right? Including CARES, HEROES, and HEALS. While this latest negotiation is on the round, the fourth package didn't reach the finish line. There have been many ongoing negotiations. Patti, can you talk about how the sausage making really has happened to date, and where does it stand now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say what we were negotiating in March and April and what the need is now, it's evolved. And I think that makes for a different, I think that's the beauty of, 435 members in the House and 100 senators, all have different stories to tell from their states and their districts. In March, April with CARES Families First, and the first piece was an emergency appropriations package the first week of March. I would say that, when we wrote House Dems passed HEROES Act over 90 days ago. And that has been our baseline for any next round of negotiations. And the Senate, I think Rob will agree with me here. It is it's much more difficult to come to a consensus than to be in the minority. It is very difficult. But I would say we passed a bill 90 days ago, but some of those pieces in there because of the evolution of the pandemic, on whether it's the economic side or the healthcare side, has evolved dramatically. What we're seeing now is the trickle-down effect of what this pandemic has done to communities, small business owners, to how do we reopen schools? How do we have childcare centers open for essential workers, but now for reopening in various areas across the country? What does that look like? And what does it cost? And what is the federal role? So I think that despite, I think there's a path forward. I completely agree with Rob. On the next relief package, I truly believe that there's a lot more that is an agreement. There are philosophical and policy differences that are very difficult to overcome, but I do think that there is a path forward here on a next package. I would say on behalf of my boss and House Democrats feel very strongly it's got to be comprehensive. Piecemeal or small nicks at things are just not going to get it done, especially when given the election year. It's got to be a big package, because I think once we get to an agreement, I don't see another package happening before November. We also have to do, to Rob's point, the normal things that, pre-COVID-19, which is, fund the government by October 1st, among some other things that just need to happen that are the day in, day out, normal legislating under normal terms. So I would say I'm optimistic. Absolutely, there's a path forward to another COVID-19 relief package. We feel very strongly it has to be comprehensive. And I think the longer that this draws out, the more lives that are impacted, whether it's infections, deceased, and what that does to communities. I mean, I think especially when August is traditionally a recess month, most members went home to their districts and to their states, and they're hearing loud and clear. So that's why I think the momentum is there. I don't think all is lost. The speaker has been very open in terms of sitting down and negotiating with the administration again and again. The door is open. But I do think there is a path forward here. I think there's progress in a lot of areas, and there's areas we just still have to work through, but there's definitely a way to get to the end game here for a next package. I think that in traditional fashion of an election year, there's a lot of hoopla, and it is what it is, but we passed a bill 90 days ago. Great example in that bill from 90 days ago, we were under the assumption that every school would be able to reopen in person. And so we wrote school meal language and provisions to help kids eat in whatever scenario. That needs to be adjusted. And those are things where there's absolutely a path forward. I don't think it's a partisan issue to make sure kids eat regardless of their learning model. But it's just things like that that have evolved, and there's absolutely bipartisanship. But I think in terms of length or some of the more granular policy details, that's where there's some disagreement, but there's absolutely agreement that there will be a next vehicle. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely does. I mean, you were already kind of hitting on the HEROES Act and the CARES Act prior, but we know that your office has led a number of food and nutrition provisions, but can you talk a little bit more specific on the evolution of what has happened since March, more in terms of with food right now, and what are you seeing over the next few either weeks or months?
Right. There's no shortage of food in the United States, but what we've seen is the disruptions to how we normally function in distribution of food, whether it's the restaurants, whether it's schools, whether it's market access for your local producers. We've seen, and before the pandemic, there's a level of uncertainty in farm communities already. So when it comes to diminished market access or farm bankruptcies, and keeping their businesses afloat, just like any small to medium-sized business owner, the reality of the pandemic has really set in, and I think the longer and this has drawn out, we're seeing just more things trickle up. Lots changed since May. And not to compound the issue, but food prices are at a historic highs. So in terms of what has happened on just those fronts, there's also the human capacity. There's the human face of it, which is people are hungry. No matter how you cut it, we've seen historic increases in food insecurity, whether it's children or households, and there's a direct correlation to the unemployment numbers to food needs. My dog is about to join this conversation, so I apologize in advance. To that end, I think that whether it's an outlook or access, I think that's going to be a part of the next package in terms of the next few weeks. We're going to see some authorities that states have had on school meals, possibly not continue under USDA. That's going to need to be legislated. We're going to see, it's a position of the speaker, it's no secret. We'd like to see an increase to the maximum SNAP benefit by 15%. We did it by 13.6% in the Recovery Act. and the Great Recession. It's a consistent policy. So there's just things that I think there are definite paths forward that will happen in the next week and weeks. I shouldn't say week. On top of that, once we pass something, it's going to take a bit to implement. So to feel those effects, and no legislation is perfect. And I think that there's going to be a continual need to perfect, extend, or what have you on a myriad of federal policies, especially in the nutrition and food space. I think that even at times where there are communities where there's high unemployment, there's always a food need. There's always a food insecurity issue. Regardless of how you do it, it's just we're going to need to legislate to meet people where they are. So whether it's sending UI, SNAP, or school meal flexibilities, regardless of how your kid's going back to school, they are in school. I just think, albeit in a dramatic fashion, there is a path forward. And we're also going to have to fund the government by, before October 1st. So I expect, not just the relief package, but there's going to be just a normal job of appropriating funding states and beyond. So there's that is going to be, I think, going to be heavy lift for the executive branch once Congress gets through our legislative process. But I think that's going to take us through the election at least. But I think after those two pieces pretty much happen, it'll be pretty quiet in Washington for a little bit.
Quiet in Washington? Okay.
But I think Rob will agree. Everyone's going to be in an election year going to their districts and states. But
yeah, I think people forget the last election year. I mean, Congress, we kind of shut down for about 4 months and really didn't do a whole lot. And so I think this is a little bit of a different time. But, Patty's definitely right. But this next upcoming appropriation bill is they call like must-pass policy. I think that would probably be the vehicle that you'll see the next package get a ride on.
Okay. All right. So, Robert, your senator, or your boss, really, Senator Wicker has championed a proposal that would support hard-hit independent restaurants through the new revitalization fund. Can you share why your boss chose to lead on this bill at this moment? And how important is the legislation? Would it help support small and independent restaurants while benefiting their workers? I mean, we're talking about farmers, fishermen, distributors, truckers that rely on them.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we developed this legislation back in March. And I guess that's where the conversations really started. One of our local restaurateur in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Robert St. John, I spoke with him. Senator Wicker spoke with him just about every day. We either talked to him or got an email from him for about 2 months. And it finally got to a point to where Senator Wicker came to me and said, we got to come up with something, write a bill. I don't care what it is, do something. We have to help out the restaurant industry. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little apprehensive at first. When COVID started, every single industry needed help, and we didn't want to be industry specific. Hotels had problems, truck drivers. I mean, a lot of different groups had issues, but when it really came down to it, I really started looking at everything that it takes to get a plate of food in front of someone at a restaurant. And you're right. I mean, it is farmers, it's fishermen, it's truck drivers, it's food processors. And there's a large nexus that goes into that process. And I really did feel like we were on the right path. We started working with the Independent Restaurant Coalition. They've got some great folks over there. And the main thing I wanted to kind of get out of this also was to tell y'all that as chefs and restaurant owners, y'all are the experts. You're the people in the field. That I wouldn't have been able to write this piece of policy, and Senator Wicker wouldn't have been able to write it without the help of chefs, without the help of restaurant owners. And so we started drafting the legislation, and we created a revitalization fund. Basically, there was a study that the restaurant industry would lose $250 billion in 2020. I mainly just cut that number in half, $120 billion fund. And we really wanted to focus on small businesses, small restaurant owners. So that's where you see in the legislation that 20 threshold. So a restaurant owner with either 20 or less. And Robert St. John, he was telling me he's got 7 models pre-COVID, probably 3 will close. So maybe he'll open up 4 of those restaurants, and maybe he just started a new Tex-Mex model. But he's really struggling. All the businesses are struggling, and every time we talk to him, he said PPP is not working for me. the 60-40 split where 60% of the PPP funds have to be labor costs. That's not where his costs are. And I know a lot of people on the other side of this video here are saying the same thing. I can't even imagine what the rent costs are in New York City. They're a little bit different than in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, but at the same time, those costs are the same. And so, I mean, he was telling us that it's not just, the labor, it's rent. I had to throw out all my food and I've got to restock now. So now I have food costs. I had utility costs. I have past bills that were going on previously. So like I said, the meat in this legislation was, first of all, making sure that we're helping out the small business owners. We're not trying to help out a person that has 1,000 Taco Bells or 500 Pizza Huts. That's not the intent of this legislation. While I do believe that they probably are getting hit hard as well, at the same time, they do have more corporate dollars that they can, use for themselves. And a lot of these restaurant owners were struggling. So we use that, but then also in PPP, we tried to expand the eligible expenses that really that our restaurant owners needed. So for instance, we added in the legislation where if a restaurant owner wanted to build out for maintenance, if they had to create outdoor eating facilities, or as we've seen in Washington, D.C., they're opening up on the sidewalk, or in New Orleans, they're opening up on the street. And so, those are added expenses that a restaurant owner is having to go to. And I'll also say too, and this is one of the biggest arguments that I've used with our leadership, is that restaurant owners are the only industry that actually have a mandate on the revenue that they can gain. When you could only have to operate a 50% capacity, that's a cap on your revenue. And you go to any other business in our country and say, hey, you know what, you can only operate at 50% and you got to reopen. It's just not doable. And the statistics are there. And what we need to continue to do, and why I'm so glad that y'all set this call up, is the fact that we've got to keep advocating for this. The fight's not over. This is something that we're going to continue to do. And even if it doesn't happen in the next package, you still need to keep advocating for your issues and for what y'all need. Because at the end of the day, the other industries that people are fighting for dollars for, they are advocating. And so I think, this is a great network for y'all to get a voice. And I'm glad to be here and happy to answer any other questions that anyone has on advocacy. Obviously, Patti and I do this on a daily basis. And, we're not necessarily the experts on, how to cook a meal. But I will say, when you really do look at how you draft policy and how a chef makes their top dish, y'all are very meticulous on the ingredients that you use and how much that you use. And we're the same way. With the language that we use in bills, we're very specific on what one word means compared to another. And it takes a while to perfect something. And, we're in kind of a hyperspeed now going in COVID, but usually when an idea comes around and policy is drafted, it could be a 6-month process. I'm working on projects that I've been working on for 5 years. And they're still ongoing. So trust me, this is nothing new to us, but I will say, I think a lot of the work that y'all do is very, very similar to the work that we do and how we craft policy.
Thank you. As you were talking, you're reminding me of when you said it takes months to get that information. It's like us with our mise en place, right? We get everything in order. We get it all ready before we go to cook that dish. Same idea for you. Just takes a little bit longer. But Robert, you guys have really, as you stated, it takes a while to get a strategy around legislation in passing. But even though the bill wasn't included in the proposed HEALS bill, can you talk about your vision for next steps around this legislation? And more importantly, what can participants on this call be doing to help you reach the finish line?
Yeah, it's a great question. And similar to that point where I talk about when the beginning steps, when you craft a dish, it's like making a gumbo. If you have a bad roux and your roux's burnt, your gumbo is going to be trash. It's done. You just throw it out and start all over again. And I've written a bunch of bills before, and I understand the process. And I knew right off the bat that we needed to have a good partner on the other side of the aisle. And I've been working with Kristen Sinema's office for a while now. She obviously came over from the House side. She's a terrific member. And we work together on this legislation, and she's been a great partner and has been able to get a lot of Democrats to support this legislation as well. And that's been really key to this legislation. When you start off, you have to have bipartisan policy if you really want to get something acted into a bill. And to your point, it wasn't included in CARES or HEROES and in the most recently HEALS. That's fine, but at the end of the day, that was drafted by, and when these bills get drafted, they're put together not only by leadership but other committee chairs. So you had people from Small Business Committee, Marco Rubio and Susan Collins were in Cardin were putting legislation together, as well as Grassley and Wyden. So they had kind of their priorities, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a bunch of different pieces of legislation that will come together as far as a whole package. And I think we're on the right path. I think we're doing exactly what we need to do. And whether they take everything from our bill or pieces from it, you can never get discouraged in this process because you never know when the politics and the policy are going to line up and everything's going to be perfect. Maybe things haven't been perfect over the last couple of months, but something will happen, something will click. And the work that we do now in July and August and September is going to prove it here in the end. So I really do think we're in a good spot. We've got a good bipartisan bill, over 30 co-sponsors in the Senate, which, first of all, just to get staffers to prioritize policy over the last couple of months has been extremely difficult. But you also look at on the House side as well. Congressman Blumenauer from Oregon, I think he's got close to 130 co-sponsors. Just 180. Oh yeah. Thanks, Patti. Yeah, that's unbelievable. Really, for policy over the last few months. You show me any other legislation in the last decade that's been able to get that much support in such a short amount of time, I would be surprised. So he's definitely doing great work over here. My boss continues to talk to members on our side of the Hill. And we've got, the advocacy has been great for this legislation. I constantly have people email me, hey, I talked to some chefs or I talked to some restaurant owners. Can you tell me more about this policy? And it could be someone from Idaho or it could be Wisconsin. So, the Independent Restaurant Coalition, chefs around the country, they're definitely doing a good job, but it's not time to slow down. We've got to kick it back up and keep going.
Great. Yeah. Well, now let's just go into more of advocacy because we're already sort of getting there already. Patti, for those working in areas around food and nutrition, what is the best way for them to weigh in and provide insights into the relevant congressional staff and members? We're talking about with regards to COVID relief, Farm Bill, and any other legislation.
Oh, I'd welcome a farm bill right now. I will say what I say to any first-time advocate, whether it's a chef or a restaurant owner or an anti-hunger advocate. Nothing is more eloquent to a member of Congress than the voice of his or her constituents. Full stop. And to that end, I think the most effective way pre-pandemic now is to share your personal story, is to take away all of the top line things of, big numbers, people who are food insecure or, all those big numbers, whittle it down to you. I think the best way to advocate for any issue, whether it's helping small and medium-sized restaurants to finding a way to get food relief to anyone under the sun, the best way is to tell your personal story. And you'd be surprised once you push all that aside, you can relate, and everyone eats and everyone can relate to that. And when you advocate from your personal story, whether it's how you started your business, how you never thought you'd come to the Hill, but there's this one thing about a piece of legislation that's important to you, whether it's the sustainability and viability of your livelihood, that is not just relatable, it's real. And I think that whether you're meeting with a staffer or an actual member of Congress, to me, that is the most salient, tangible, and it especially if it's your first time on the Hill or talking with congressional staff, it's easier to talk about yourself than to remember talking points from a piece of paper. And once you get into the hang of it after 20 meetings in a day, like you, Tiffany, you get there. And I think you pick up on the dynamics, and there's things to do and not do, but that is the reason you're there, is to tell the XYZ of A, I'm here. B, this is important to me. C, why. And from my point of view, you know, when pre-pandemic, when you're meeting in person and you're doing the travel and then the training and then you're sent off to the abyss on the hill to meet with staff, to me, you might not be getting the business cards, but you're getting the contact information of staff. And I think a lot of legislation folks will talk about, it's the meetings and things like these webinars and training that help hold our offices accountable to the issues. And there's no perfect legislation, but I use sports metaphor of base hits go a really long way. Base hits can get you a championship. It's not always a walk-off home run. So when it comes to smaller issues and why it's important, that's why your voices know your power in that sense. And think the other piece of it is if you can relate it to broadly, like it doesn't have to be in a granular issue either. It can be a broad how it impacts you on small business, taxes, food insecurity, something at USDA, something at FDA, OSHA, you name it. If you can relate to it, it's very easy to have many meetings on the Hill and you get the contact information of staff and those offices, and those are relationships, touch bases, follow up. That's why you have the initial meetings. Hold our feet to the fire. I know that is about to create a flood into both Rob and I's inboxes, but that's what we're here for. And I think that don't be afraid to, you can be civil, you can be articulate, and you can do all of these things, but the personal stories to me and how it relates to you is really what makes the outside mobilizing so effective on getting things to the end game, making things too hot to handle, but also, you know, congressional staff don't know everything. And if you go in with that know-how, like I have something to share that is unique and different, it's effective and it's real and it informs our jobs to do better policy, to be honest. So.
You're right. And I think that stories in general, our stories, each of us have an individual story and it's so powerful. And when we tell our stories, it comes from the heart. It's not us trying to remember something from a paper or the numbers. And it flows differently. You know, it engages whoever you're talking to very differently than when we're trying to recite information. So it seems like that was definitely one of the things that was told to me often. So it seems like it is right. Patti, are you guys doing Zoom calls as well for the meetings?
Zoom, Teams, WebEx. This platform is new to me, so now I can add this one to the hopper. Yes, and we all have phones. We have our government issued phones, and so I also make good old calls. So that the phones now have the internet. So imagine that. And so to that end, I think that I'm arguably more accessible because of the multiple mediums that I can be reached at. And, forcing the hand of Congress to modernize on this issue is probably a good thing. But we're having to be more accessible to make it work and to change how we do our work. And accessibility is not so much an issue. I'd say that anyone that's teleworking or working from home, yes, there's a challenge with that. However, your family operates, there's always that challenge, but accessibility is definitely not an issue. And all of the mediums, because it's our job to be available, frankly. So.
Nice. Available at all times via call or video. Okay, Robert, in your opinion, why are chefs good advocates? We hear it often, that's kind of what they're telling us, but industry folks in general, what have you seen lately that shows the growth of the chef and the advocacy community? It could be through ads, news, however you're seeing it.
Yeah, I think y'all are both kind of hitting on a key point here, and I guarantee if you ask myself or Patti how we got to the Hill, we're going to have completely different stories about how we got here. So I think opening up of how you became a chef, it just makes things a little more comfortable. And first of all, everyone loves to hear about food. We all love to hear about restaurants. So y'all ultimately have an in right off the bat. And I'll just say, just during this process, watching I'll say I don't watch MSNBC that often, and I don't watch Fox News either. I've actually been turning off the news. But when I do have friends and family that come and tell me, hey, I heard on the news today about the Restaurants Act, or I saw Tom Colecchio talking about the impact the restaurants are having, and he mentioned Senator Wicker. That's really cool. That's really cool on my part, but also from Senator Wicker to know that while we did take on this initiative, we also know that we have the backing of the industry, and not just to say the National Restaurant Association put out a press release, but knowing that these other restaurant owners and chefs are out there calling their members, talking to staffers, because at the end of the day, you know, we spent 2 months drafting this policy. Roger Wicker and Rob Murray can't tell, you know, Rob Portman from Ohio that say, oh yeah, you know what, you should talk to this chef in Columbus. No, the chef in Columbus has to call Rob Portman. And because I don't know what's best for Ohio. I know our bill's good. I know it could definitely provide relief for this industry, but at the end of the day, it's got to be the constituents in that state. It's got to be the chefs in that state calling. And I'll say, also, you know, I really challenge everyone, whether you know, whatever district you live in your state, just Google your House member. They have offices there. Go and introduce yourself to that constituent liaison or caseworker or district directors that's there. Guess what they also have? They have a list of every single DC staffer, every single policy person in front of them. Go up to them and say, hey, who handles small business issues for y'all? Who handles labor issues for y'all? Can you give me the staffer's name? Introduce yourself. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's really, once you get that in, and then follow up, be like, hey, introduce yourself. Do you mind if we hop on a web call? And then I'll also say too, you know, just on the advocacy side, you know, when you do have these WebEx calls, that's not the end. You know, you need to follow up afterwards. Hey, Rob, I really appreciate you hopping on that video call the other day. I did have a couple of other questions I didn't want to ask in front of 20 other people, but, you know, either it's, look, first of all, there's no dumb questions because I can assure you, Patti and I do not know everything. We've heard them all before. And then there's times, well, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let me call CRS. I bet you they can give me that answer for you. So I just want to, you know, really kind of challenge everyone after this, you know, learn who your district, first of all, learn who your members of Congress are. I've also had that before. Learn who the people that are working in your district. I guarantee you probably run into them before. They've probably eaten at your restaurant. You just don't know it. But then I'd also challenge y'all too to have members come see firsthand. You know, I know some of y'all are struggling to reopen, but you know, getting in front of folks is really important. But also, like we said earlier in the call, building relationships with staffers. But then also set up goals here in, you know, a month or 2 months. You know, set on your calendar. Hey, I'm going to follow up with Rob Murray in Senator Wicker's office and just kind of check in and say, hey, Rob, you mind if we hop on a call? Just want to hear kind of what's going on in DC. There's a lot of Hill staffers that like to talk about what they're doing. So there's definitely not a shortage of that.
Okay, real quick before we move on to our next part, I just kind of want to ask both of you, how do we build sustaining relationships with the Hill? I know we've talked about, you know, going in, telling our personal stories, but what advice outside of those, whether it's, you know, being prepared, whatever it is, something short that we can take away from this conversation?
Yeah, you're getting contact information for staff if you're meeting with them. Stay in touch. And one of the, I think, most effective questions, regardless of the issue, if it's coronavirus, Restaurants Act, Farm Bill, tell folks who else you're meeting with, because to make sure that strategy-wise you can develop relationships, but that you're meeting also with the right offices. You were probably being sent to the Hill by folks that know what they're doing, but making sure that, let's say you end up going to 20 meetings, but none of them are with your member of Congress or your senator. It's important to ask that question in the meetings that you're with so that you do get connected or have a way to get connected to folks that are going to be making some of the decisions or folks that are going to be negotiating pieces of, you know, any legislation. I think that is one of the most effective questions is, hey, this is who else we're meeting with during our visit, or who else I've talked to. Do you have anyone else that I should talk to? Because I can tell you from a leadership office perspective, half the battle is the public education on the issue and the legislation. And that gets into the whole consensus conversation on moving anything, whether it's the House or Senate. Or if it's the chairman that you haven't met with, a ranking member, or even, beyond just the circle of the authors of a piece of legislation, and stay in touch. Ask the questions. Oh, I'm having a hard time getting into this office. How do I get in touch with them? Those are things that I think that sustain relationships, widen your circle, and make you more comfortable when you're meeting and talking to congressional staff. I will tell you, Tom Colicchio is very good at that. I will say that on this webinar. And there's a myriad of other chefs that are too. Jose is one of them as well. But to that end, they also stay in touch, and that is why you're meeting with these staff. It's not just the one time you're going to talk to them about an issue, it's over time. And then you figure out how else other federal issues impact your work. So that to me is the longevity and sustainability of Good Hill relationships. And then you get to know the staffers. Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that, Robert?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I used to work in sales before this, and you never go into a sales meeting without getting a referral afterwards. I think talking about, when you're talking to a staffer, be like, hey, if you had anyone else talk about these same issues, and that's really how you build coalitions. I mean, when you look at restaurant issues and the stuff you're facing, I was just thinking about realtors. I mean, if restaurant owners can't pay their rent, well, then the realtors are probably struggling too. So, those are really things where you can build coalitions together. And you also build with other staffers too. Be like, hey, you know what? I was really struggling to get a hold of someone in Senator Rubio's office. Do you know anyone over there that I can contact? And usually we'll know a staffer, or at least be able to put you in touch with someone that, we've talked to, or has a link, or maybe through another office or something like that. But if you never ask a question, you're not going to get the answer. And I think at the end of the day, you don't want to be too pushy, but at the same time, you guys, the ball's in y'all's court. And as hard as you push, you got to continue to do that. And people are always willing to link other people up here. There's usually not a dead end. Don't think that's the way things are going. You just got to ask.
Right. Yep. You got to ask. You never know the answer unless you ask the question. I think a couple of things that I'm taking away from this is always be prepared, for whatever you're going to speak about. Personal stories are strong and they create connections. And you said be kind and respectful, right? I'm not there to tell you off. I'm there to have a conversation and hopefully give you some information and create a resource. And then obviously stay connected. The follow-up. It seems like that's where a lot of times people mess up in life. Follow through. Okay. But definitely those things. And one more thing before we go to the questions part. Have you had a moment where you thought your boss was gonna, go one way, but they spoke with the constituent and changed or convinced them to talk about or move the needle one way?
Oh, all the time. But that's part of, I think, so when it comes to the Hill, you're meeting with probably policy staff. Policy staff, that is the constant battle, is who did my boss talk to and how did they arrive at that place? And as much as we also said before this piece is that we are the policy experts, but we don't know everything, I'd like to think that my job is to know a little bit about something. So all the time, sometimes, and some of it's hard to piece together because, we're not, with them all the time. So sometimes it comes out in a myriad of ways. It could be in the press, it could be in another meeting later down the road. But yes, I can safely say that there is no congressional staffer that's not subject to this. And some of it too is, digging into it. And some of it ends up being, let's say, a shop talks to our bosses without a staffer there and they learn something. And then that sends us on a fact-finding mission. I can't tell you how often that happens, a week, every day. I can see Rob smiling and I know that he's been sent down the rabbit hole before, but that's our job. But I know that too is that sometimes that sends us into, well, why is this happening locally? Or that's an interesting, I've never heard of that. Why would that happen? That's the policy wonk nerd stuff that we dive into often. And then that will send us off to the Congressional Research Service or to the committees, or I'll call, someone on the Senate Democrat side or anyone who has some resemblance of knowing something more about this. So yes, Usually it's either me trying to confirm it or trying to figure out a path forward, or figuring out an avenue to make something better or improve a situation or what have you. Not to speak in generalities, but it happens all the time. But that is the, policy nerds, that's what we do.
Got it.
Yeah, I completely agree with Patti. I mean, I've got a staff of about 20, so I can control our message, our ledge staff message. But then once Senator Wicker gets out of DC or just literally gets out of our office, he could be called by anyone, he could run into anyone, he could run into another member. And my boss has been here since '95. Obviously, Patti's boss has been in here for a long time as well. And so they have taken positions on issues for years and years. So, you have a ledge staffer, so maybe you have an LC or an LA is on a certain level, so they have access to certain information, an LD, a little more information, and it goes up, chief, and then a member. So the member knows a lot more than we do, a lot. And so, to that point, they already know what they're going to do. And, when we pitch ideas, I'm on the surface level, what's right in front of me, but the member might have access to more information that I don't. So they might be making a decision based off of other things. And usually he'll clear that up with me, and usually he'll just say, no, Rob, we're going this way. And that's what we do. But at the end of the day, Patti and I both know we have to stand by our points and by the decisions that we're going to make in that moment with the information that we have, so that they know that they can trust us.
Got it. Yeah. It's funny because all of that comes back to your voice matters, right? Like, so whatever we're doing, and even if we are not fully aware, we have to tell our story, and we should show up, and we should give the information, and we should be prepared, and we should be passionate, and all of these things. So it's so important, and it makes it easier for you, right? Some information. So we're going to move on to some questions. I know we are kind of coming to the end of our session, but Ashley, if you want to take it over from here.
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody, for such a great panel. So if you do, we have some questions that came in. We're going to get to as many as we can kind of within the time that we have. So if you do have a question, again, use that question box. So this one came in, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to throw this to either Patti or Rob. So what is the best way to communicate with a staffer or a member of Congress or the Senate? Emails are the easiest, but are they the most effective?
Yes, if you don't get an answer, call. I think that we all have, I know folks are a little put off if the office has a voicemail these days, or not a physical person answering, but I can reassure you every congressional office, no matter how they're operating right now, is attempting to be responsive. Email, then call, or call, then email. I'd say they're interchangeable. I think it's effective, but I think reaching out is best. I will tell you, my inbox, my dogs are here, I'm sorry. My email inbox is a bit of a disaster, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to email or call or the rest.
Yeah, I completely agree. Maybe after 2 emails, if you don't hear something, maybe try to call the front office. Some front offices they'll be automated, and then you've got someone on the other end that's checking voicemails. Honestly, at the end of the day, I wouldn't say go and be a crazy person and show up at the district office. But, to that point, I think sometimes saying, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of a staffer. I know we're in kind of weird times. I just wanted to hand deliver my email. Can you make sure that it gets there? I would normally say to do that, but if you're not getting a response after 2 or 3 emails, which our office policies, we respond to every single email, every single call, and I can guarantee you the last thing a staffer wants is for our chief of staff to say, Rob, why have you not emailed Robert back or something? It's not a good conversation.
All right, and so I've called the U.S. Capitol switchboard. I've gotten through to the office. I left a message. Do I start with, my name's so-and-so, I'm a constituent, and I would like to talk to the person responsible for the Restaurants Act, HR 7197. Should I let them direct me? Do I just talk at whoever answers the phone? What's the next step after I get a human on the phone or someone calls me back?
Yeah, I would just say, hey, do you know the staffer in the office that would handle this issue?
Yeah. And not to mention, every single member of Congress also has a contact me tab on their website. So if you don't get a physical person and you want to go electronic, every single senator and representative has a contact me somewhere on their website. Go through that avenue, and that gets infiltrated to, and usually also connects you with the exactly specific staffer that you need to talk to, meet with, what have you, whether it's a letter or requesting a meeting or asking for the position of the member on this bill.
Yeah, and on their websites, our system, I don't know, Patty and them might have a different one, but ours is called Internet Quorum. And when you send an email from our website, it goes to one of our LC legislative correspondents. Senator Wicker responds to all of his mail that comes in. He also reads all of the incoming, like people that write in, and he'll check off people that he knows or wants to read their individual mail. But when people write on different issues, we respond, or a legislative assistant, maybe if they recognize that person, they'll give a call.
Thank you. So I feel like from what I'm hearing over the course of this last hour is, if you're talking to a staffer, you're talking to a member of Congress, first introduce yourself, share a personal story about who you are and why you're here. Make sure you have an ask. Say thank you and ask who you should follow up with if you're talking to a member of Congress or a staffer, who's the most appropriate person to be following up with, and then do that follow-up. So, as we go in these last few minutes, I'd like to ask each of you, Chef Tiffany, Rob, and Patti, what is kind of like maybe the one or two biggest pieces of advice you would give to folks who this might be their first time talking to their member of Congress or their staff person? What's one big takeaway that you think will help them? So, Tiffany, I'm going to start with you.
I think I'm going to go with be confident and tell your story, because no one will tell your story quite like you. And then just know that they are eager to hear. And once you go in that mindset, it's like other things start to flow once you tell that story, from questions about certain things or them wanting to know. So just be confident. You got this.
Great. Rob?
Well, Tiffany definitely took mine. As far as confidence is concerned, you guys do something that 90% of the country cannot do, is cook really good food. I struggle. I can barbecue really well, but I think it's that confidence of knowing what you do really well, and then just implementing what you've learned in your skills in your current job into what we do. We all work in very stressful environments. You guys run a business and you're a chef. I mean, that's extremely difficult to do, and you have your different brands, and so I think just finding that unique common thing between yourself and policy, and really just kind of running with it. But at the end of the day, I mean, it really is about confidence, and I definitely have the utmost confidence in y'all. And just what I've seen, I wasn't talking to any chefs 2 years ago, or restaurant owners 2 years ago, but I think just the steps in progress that y'all have made over the last 6 months, it's definitely commendable, but it's not a time to pat yourself on the back. You've got to keep going. You got to keep pushing, and you've got to, and also stay organized, stay together. When you talk about, reaching out to individual offices, well, you have individual chefs, I'm sure, that you communicate with on a daily basis. Maybe talk to them. Hey, have you talked to so-and-so and so-and-so's office? I mean, how did your conversation go? And to continue to learn from each other.
I know that there are pots and pans, and that's a flex move I did not intentionally mean to do for this webinar. But I would say that just know that your personal story is what makes your visit unique, to what Tiffany said. So be confident. What Rob said is stay in touch, know what you're talking about, and just know that even if you're meeting with a junior staffer or a senior staffer or a member of Congress, is that you actually do have many things in common, even if you're politically on a different spectrum. We all eat. And there are ways to bend that to find similarities and commonalities between each other. People, and you yourself might be food insecure at some point. You might have tried to navigate a USDA program before. You've tried to apply for small business assistance. You have tried to stay afloat in the middle of a global pandemic that we've never seen anything like it before in our lifetimes. So we are all living and breathing it, and I think that it's totally fine to be nervous. It's okay to not know what you're to expect. You might be crammed in the closet in a little table with the junior staffer, but just know that these meetings do go up, they get to the top, they are impactful, and they inform what we do. You can't inform policy if you've never talked to anyone that's lived through these things. And I think that to me, particularly is just remember we all eat and everyone has to eat and we feed the world. And that is a place of power where you have a huge voice. And I wouldn't underestimate that the outside mobilizing with what chefs have done, particularly in the last 5 years on federal policy, it's effective, it's meaningful, and it's nice to have fresh new voices, always.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the entire panel, Chef Tiffany Derry, Rob Murray, and Patti Ross. And Rob, also thank you to Senator Roger Wicker for his work on the Restaurants Act in the Senate. That's been amazing. And thank you everybody for attending. Like I said at the top of the program, a recording of this webinar will be available on the James Beard website. That's jamesbeard.org, and it's our industry support webinars. We will have more programs coming to you next week, and we'll have information on next week webinars going up tomorrow. If you haven't signed up for our emails already, we have a regular Friday email that announces all of our upcoming webinars, and we're really excited for those. So thank you again, and we hope to see you here soon.
Thank you all.
Hi.